Hello and welcome to On the Case with me, Detective Alex Cardinale. I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching this episode of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale. Today we go old school. We travel back over 100 years to talk about one of the most infamous American criminals. This criminal was known as a robber and also a murderer. He shot 7 people, including 3 police officers, and he robbed a lot of banks. This man is somewhat considered an American legend. Not a good legend, but a bad legend because he was a career criminal in the 1920s and he got away with a lot. He got away with escaping jail, robbing people, and killing people until he was ultimately shot and killed by police officers. Today's show focuses on a man known as Killer of the Prohibition Era. The killer of the Prohibition Era, Edward James Adams, robbed, shot, and killed police and people in the 1920s. So today, we're going to talk about the killer of the Prohibition Era, Edward Adams. We're going to learn all about Edward Adams, an American legend, a criminal legend who did some pretty nasty crimes 100 years ago. So we're going to take a trip down memory lane and learn about Edward James Adams. So like always, you can share your thoughts on this crime in the comments. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this show started. So here is what to know about this case. And we're going to learn about our suspect, Edward James Adams. Edward James Adams was born in 1887 and he died on November 22nd, 1921, when he was shot and killed by police officers. Edward Adams was a notorious American criminal and spree killer in the Midwest. He murdered 7 people, including 3 policemen, over a period of around 14 months, and he wounded at least a dozen others. At age 34, Adams was surrounded and then killed by police in Wichita, Kansas. Edward James Eddie Adams was born in 1887 on a farm in Hutchinson, Kansas, as William Joseph Wallace. His father died when he was young, and his mother remarried. He had a strong disdain for his stepfather as well as for physical labor. He learned the barber trade and moved to Wichita, Kansas in the early 20th century. There he met John Callahan and quickly became involved in bootlegging, which means smuggling in alcohol illegally, petty robberies, and car theft. One key note about Edward James Adams was that Adams was handsome and charismatic, and he attracted many women and hanger-ons. Now, hanger-ons are typically people who stay friends with people to their benefit. So, in other words, people hang on to you so they can reap the rewards that you have. His wife left him after growing weary of his illegal activities and infidelities. Edward Adams soon formed his own gang and began committing bank and train robberies throughout Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa, eventually earning a reputation as the premier bandit in the Midwest by the early days of Prohibition. In 1920, through Callahan, Adams formed a partnership with outlaw brothers Ray and Walter Majors, and on September 5th attempted a daylight robbery against a notorious Kansas City gambling den on Grand Avenue owned by Harry Trustell. However, a shootout between the bandits and tough employees of the illegal casino resulted in the death of gambler and gunman Frank Gardner, and eventually they were captured, eventual capture of the gang by police. Edward Adams was sentenced to life imprisonment in February of 1921 for his involvement in the murder of Frank Gardner and for being a part of the gang. The Majors brothers received lesser sentences by agreeing to plead guilty to robbery and were both sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Both brothers eventually died in prison. A third Majors brother involved in the botched robbery attempt, Dudley, escaped from the scene only to be later arrested and serve time in Delaware. So that is what to know about this case. Now, let's get to the action. Let's learn about the crimes that Edward J. Adams did. Let's learn about what made Edward J. Adams famous. Here is the crime and our main focus for our show today. So, while being transported to the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson, Missouri, Edward Adams escaped custody by jumping off the train, and several days later, he joined Julius Finney in the robbery of a bank and general store in Coolison, Kansas on February 11th, 1921. He was captured on February 17th, 1921, near Garden Plain, Kansas, by a posse after wrecking a stolen car under a bridge. Convicted of bank robbery, Edward Adams was sentenced to serve 10 to 30 years at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, in addition to his life sentence in Missouri for murder. On August 13th, Edward Adams once again successfully escaped imprisonment after sabotaging the prison power plant and scaling the prison walls during the night, along with inmates Frank Foster, George Westerberger, and D.C. Brown. The driver of the getaway car was Billy Fiddleman, a World War I veteran who had turned to a life of crime. With the exception of Brown, who was recaptured days later, the fugitives eluded capture from state authorities and eventually formed what became the newest incarceration of the Adams Gang. By September of that year, joined by Fiddleman, the gang robbed around $10,000 from banks in Rose Hill and Hayesville, Kansas. During the Hayesville robbery, Edward Adams pistol whipped 82-year-old James Crevel for no apparent reason, and unfortunately, 82 years old James Crevel later died of a fractured skull. On October 8th, police attempted to trap the gang near Onali, Kansas, but the gang managed to escape after a gunfight that left Deputy Benjamin Fisher wounded. The gang was spotted 11 days later after stealing $500 in silver from a bank near Osceola, Idaho. This was followed by another attempt by a posse to apprehend the gang just south of Murray, Idaho, where the gang rested for several hours along a gravel road just a few miles from town. Having spotted the gang's vehicle, suspicious farmer C.J. Jones contacted Murray Sheriff Ed West, and a group was formed to investigate and intervene. Upon approaching the vehicle, Sheriff West was met at point blank range with a revolver to his face that failed to fire. He was able to take cover, and a shootout followed in which several members of the posse were seriously injured. Edward Jones, having heard the gun battle from his farm up the road, grabbed his shotgun and ran to aid Sheriff West and his group. The gang, who had by now fled from the original site, drove up the road and exchanged fire with Jones, which left him mortally wounded. So Jones, the farmer, C.J. Jones, died from his wounds. Heading for Wichita, Edward Adams' gang's crime spree continued, robbing 11 stores in Muscatah, Kansas, and abducting and later robbing 2 motorcycle officers outside Wichita, where their motorcycles were set on fire. Back on 5th, 1921, Edward Adams shot and killed police officer and patrolman Al Young in cold blood while Young was on duty. The motive behind the killing was said to be a mutual love interest who had chosen the company of the officer over the outlaw. The gang then committed their most successful robbery with the theft of $35,000 after robbing a Santa Fe express train near Ottawa, Kansas. Here is the historic night, November 20th, 1921, 101 years ago. On the evening of November 20th, 1921, Edward Adams, along with Foster, Nellie Miles, a local madam, and I'm going to keep it real with you, a local madam simply means hoe. It means hoe or it means whore. Now, Nellie was also a longtime friend of Edward Adams. He was also accompanied by George McFarland, a local thug and bootlegger, and two alleged prostitutes. They were all joyriding around Wichita. Another car carrying Fiddleman, his wife, Westerberger, P.G. Orcott, and two unnamed ladies followed at high speeds. Two motorcycle policemen pulled over the vehicle carrying Adams, and a gunshot came from the vehicle. Whether the shot was fired by Adams or Foster is unknown, but it killed police officer Robert Fitzpatrick. The outlaws sped away, released the women, and fled south into Cowley County. Later that night, the trio ran out of gas and stopped at a farm where Adams attempted to steal a vehicle from farmer George Oldham. When Oldham resisted, Adams shot and killed him. Adams and Foster took the car while McFarland ran away alone into the night. The duo returned to Wichita in the stolen car. The next day, Adams and Billy Fiddleman went to McFarland's house to look for him, only to find two officers waiting. It was there that Edward Adams shot and wounded police officer Ray Kastner while the other policeman hid under a bed. Edward Adams once again escaped. Edward Adams hid out until the funeral of fallen police officer Fitzpatrick on November 22nd, 1921, at which he assumed the bulk of the police force would be present. He had planned to rent a car to leave town for good, but the proprietor of the garage recognized him and contacted police. That ended his plans. Three officers arrived on the scene. Adams shot at them, fatally wounding and killing Detective Charles Hoffman, who had pulled Adams to the ground. Officer Charles Bowman was also hit by gunfire. D.C. Stuckey, hiding behind a pillar, shot Adams 3 times and killed him. So on the night of November 22nd, police officer D.C. Stuckey put an end to the terror that Edward Adams was causing in the 1920s. So he was killed. Instead of being arrested and thrown in jail, he really got what he deserved and he was killed because Edward Adams tortured so many people. He killed 7 people, including 3 police officers. He robbed people, took their belongings and their money, and then killed them. And he pistol whipped an 82-year-old man. So Edward Adams was an evil son of a bitch, but he got what he deserved. Karma bit him in the ass as he was shot and killed by a police officer on November 22nd, 1921. Eddie Adams' body was publicly displayed in the city undertaking parlor in a grisly celebration of the end of a reign of terror. That's why this guy is known as an American legend. That's why he's considered to be a criminal legend. He was hated by so many people. And when he was shot and killed, people celebrated his death because he killed police officers and he did all these heinous acts. More than 9,000 people viewed the slain outlaw. In the end, 18 people were arrested as accomplices and hanger-ons of Edward Adams. 4 were sent to the Kansas City State Penitentiary, including Frank Foster, who was sentenced to remain there for life. And that is the crimes of infamous robber and murderer Edward James Adams. Kind of a crazy case when you think about it, because these guys got away with robbing a lot of people, getting several thousands of dollars, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars. They killed people, they shot and killed police officers, which is a really bad crime. He escaped prison a couple of times, and he was able to have a several month period where he was creating robberies and schemes and shooting and killing people. But in the end, karma got him, and he was shot and killed by police officers. So this was a really interesting case to talk about. It's kind of crazy to think that in American history, this crime comes up time and time again. And when I saw it, I said, you know what? I got to do a show on this case. Even though this case is over 100 years old, it could be a valuable lesson to people. The lesson that it could teach people is that no matter how bad you think you are, no matter how much of an outlaw you think you can be, justice will be served in the end. And for Edward J. Adams, his justice came at the end of a pistol by a police officer when he was shot and killed. I can only imagine it had to feel so good for that police officer to get revenge for the three other police officers that Edward Adams killed. So my thoughts on this case, even though it's a over 100-year-old crime, it really is a sad crime when you think about it, because Edward Adams robbed so many people. He killed three police officers. He killed an 82 defenseless-year-old man. And he did a lot of crimes, crazy crimes. But in the end, it's over 100 years old, and America has moved on. And there have been bigger robberies since this case. So I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale. I had a lot of fun talking about this crime. On the next episode of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale, I'm going to talk about robberies. As a matter of fact, our next couple of episodes of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale are going to be centered around robberies. Robberies are going to be our trend for the next couple of episodes of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale. So on the next episode of On the Case, we're going to talk about one of the biggest robberies in American history. It is known as the Dunbar Armed Robbery, and it was led by Alan Pace. So make sure you tune in to the next episode of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale. And don't forget to check out all of our previous episodes of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale by going to my YouTube channel, The Legendary Alex Cardinale, and going under the On the Case of Alex Cardinale playlist, and you'll be able to choose from 30 plus previous episodes of On the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale. So if you're a new viewer, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Legendary Alex Cardinale, because I do crime videos like this one. I do cooking and baking videos, tropical fish keeping videos, wrestling videos, talk shows, and a whole lot more. There is something for everybody, and you will not want to miss all of my videos. I can guarantee that. So make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Legendary Alex Cardinale. Thank you all for watching. Stay safe if you're in Florida, because we have a Hurricane Ian warning, and I'm sure you heard the thunder in the background. But if you're not from Florida, thank you for watching, and stay safe anyway. Remember, if you see a crime, say something. If you see something, say something. Thank you for watching. I'm Detective Alex Cardinale. It's been my honor and privilege to discuss this crime with you. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you for watching.